Okay, so I hope you heard the last part, but I'll just recap quickly. So this is another session of our webinar series, data series. And like I mentioned, there are a number of databases that are available by default in SimaPro, but there are also databases that you can obtain separately, and this is one of them, what we're going to highlight today, the EF 2.0 database. Before we start the session, I just want to go over some practical issues. So we will be recording this session, and you will all receive an email with a link to the recording. Or if you can wait a day or two, it will also be available on the SimaPro Help Center. And you can access the SimaPro Help Center by going to support.simapro.com. All of you are muted, all attendees. So please feel free to send your questions via the chat box, and we will either answer them immediately or we will wait until the Q&A at the end. So, So thanks again for joining. I'm Rupa. I'm the Senior Customer Service Specialist at PRAY, and for the most part, I'll be facilitating the session. Last April, we held a webinar about the European Commission's Environmental Footprint Initiative and how it relates to the new offerings for our SimaPro users. But at that time, only the adapted EF method was available in SimaPro. Since then, we are pleased to have released the EF 2.0 database, including the original EF method. So to tell us all about it is my colleague and praised principal consultant Marisa Vieira. Hi, Marisa.
Hi. Hi.
So Marisa leads the consultants team, and her areas of expertise include the environmental product performance, sustainability metrics, and sustainability strategy. Basically, at PRAY, she's been involved in all things PEF since 2011 or so. Before I switch things over to Marisa, I'd like to also briefly introduce PRAY, where our main mission is to guide positive change with fact-based solutions. We have three main core values, and we like to pride ourselves on our transparency and collaboration with partners worldwide. And one way, in terms of fact-based solutions, one way is, of course, by developing SimaPro and providing it to our users. But PRAY also plays an active role in a variety of projects and initiatives, such as PEF, Social Roundtable, and the development of impact assessment methods. We're happy to service our large SimaPro family, which reaches more than 3,000 users. And not only via PRAY, but also our global partner network. And maybe in context of this webinar, it's interesting to note that SimaPro was used by the majority of the pilots in the EF pilot phase. So a few highlights from our PEF experience. We were involved in a number of areas. It may be interesting to know that help desk of the EF pilot phase. We have coordinated the remodeling consortia, which remodeled the benchmarks. And we were also involved in the development of the EF compliant secondary data, which is, of course, included in the EF database we're highlighting this afternoon. Now, we'd like to engage you all by launching a poll. So, and we are really curious why you're attending this poll. So you should get in a couple of minutes. Oh yeah, a couple of seconds I would. And you should be able to see the percentages changing as people answer the poll. Interesting to see. So we'll give it a few more seconds, and then we will close the poll and share the answers. Quite interesting.
Very surprising. But of course, we're seeing it before you do. 80% of the people responded, so let's give the last few the chance to answer. This should be an easy one. The next poll will be more difficult. It's stable now for a while, so maybe I can.
Yeah, we'll close the poll and share the answers with you.
So 53% of you said that you will use the EF database to do a PEF or OEF study. And 47% of you said, not really, but I'm just curious. So it's about half-half, and this is quite surprising that many of you actually listening is planning to use it for a PEF and OEF study.
Yeah. Okay, so before I fully move on and switch presenters to Marisa, what you could maybe a little bit about what you can expect. So for the coming hour, we will discuss why is EF data and SimaPro relevant. Give you an overview of what is included in the EF database. Go over that SimaPro is a fully compliant EF tool. And show you what we've developed as a PEF tool, and discuss. We've got already a number of questions regarding who is eligible to use the database, how you can access it. So we will go over that and highlight some of the more important user instructions. And Marisa will give an outlook on what will be included in the future, and we will make sure to reserve enough time for questions. So with that, I hand it over to you, Marisa.
Thank you, Ruba. So first of all, just to set a bit of the context, why have we decided to make this EF database available in SimaPro format, and why is this relevant? Well, the thing is that with the completion of the EF pilot phase, environmental footprint pilot phase, there were a number of PEFCRs and OEFSRs that were approved. So PEFCR stands for Product Environmental Footprint Category Rule, and OEFSR stands for Organizational Environmental Footprint Sector Rule. And these documents, they actually prescribe the use of EF secondary datasets. So they really list what are the exact datasets you must use if you plan on doing a PEF or OEF study that aims for compliance with any of these PEFCRs and OEFSRs. Those documents also say that you should use, or you shall use, the DEF impact assessment method, also version 2.0. So this is really mandatory if you want to claim compliance with any of the approved PEFCRs and OEFSRs during the pilot phase. And this also makes immediately clear why it is relevant for us to release this to our customers. If they want to do any of these, they must have access to the data and to the method. And we facilitate this for our SimaPro users by providing this data already in a format that it's, ready for you to go and to use. So what does the EF database 2.0 in SimaPro include? In fact, we have one single library project, and this library project includes the following. It includes all EF compliant datasets that were purchased by the European Commission, because this was part of one big set of contracts by the European Commission where they contracted different data vendors to supply the data necessary for the pilots who are running during the pilot phase. So these are all included. Then we have ILCD compliant datasets, and these are datasets that were used to fill in existing data gaps. So this means that they don't fully fulfill the EF modeling requirements, but they were still available in ILCD format. And we've implemented them as well, because they are also part of this list of prescribed datasets to be used in the PEFCRs and OEFSRs. And then we also include in that library the EF impact assessment method, also version 2.0, so the same version as the one to be used with any of these PEFCRs and OEFSRs. Apart from that, we also have included as database parameters the default values of the circular footprint formula. And for those of you not familiar with this, this is the end-of-life formula that is prescribed to be used in the context of PEF. And we have facilitated also that you don't have to look into the annexes of the guidance of the PEF, but you can just get them from your list of parameters and use them directly in your model this way. So to say a few more words about the EF database, well, at the bottom you see the hyperlink in which you can find it and you can download it. So that's the web page we have in our SimaPro.com website. And another thing that I should say is that all of these datasets are compliant with the EF package version 2.0, and this package was essentially kind of the fixed list of substances, units, characterization factors that the Commission has released in the context of the pilot phase, and they also froze it to be used with any output of the pilot phase, so to speak. So this is what it includes. Now zooming in a bit more into the method. So like I said, this is the method in the version 2.0, because meanwhile the Commission also released the version 3.0, and that will be the version that will be used during the transition phase. But for those who aim compliance with approved PFCRs and OEFSRs, you must still use the EF 2.0 version of the method. And this includes 16 impact categories. You see them in the infographic. They are all characterized at midpoint level, so each has its own, unit. Then global normalization is used, and there's panel weighting, which also accounts for the robustness of the indicators. And actually in SimaPro, you will see that we have two weighting sets. We have one which excludes the 3 toxicity impact categories, because those were the rules during the pilot phase, but we have another set which was including these 3 toxicity impact categories. I will show you later when we go into SimaPro. What does the EF database does not include that one could expect it would include? And it is the data sets that were included in the, let's say, textile batch of data sets purchased by the European Commission. These were developed by Cicleco. And since Cicleco didn't sign the contract amendment with the European Commission that allows distribution by software providers, they must still go through the original route, which is to download it from the node of Cicleco. You see there also the hyperlink. And then you must request a conversion to SimaPro format. But the only reason why we didn't include it is because the terms and conditions of this specific data package didn't allow for direct distribution by software providers. And now the big elephant in the room, because there is a lot of rumor about which softwares are compliant with PEF and which are not. Actually, now in the context of the transition phase, there is a working group set up by the European Commission called the Data Working Group, in which one of the task force will be to develop a checklist to determine when a software is EF ready. That's the term they use. But until that comes, I dare to say that SimaPro is an EF compliant tool, and I will tell you why I believe that is the case. It includes all EF datasets and the EFIA method that was used in the EF pilot phase. So that all in all, it means that anyone who wants to do a PEF or OEF study according to any of these approved PFCRs is equipped to do it in SimaPro. And another thing is that each dataset includes in SimaPro all metadata fields that are required. So this is now displayed in the comment field of the dataset. And for those of you who are familiar with SimaPro, this will just mean that your comment field will be much larger than usual, but all minimum metadata information is displayed there. Another very important one is that in this EF database that we release and that you can download at the SimaPro.com website, we restrict the substances to only those that are allowed in the EF package. That means that typically you have a larger list in your SimaPro database, but not that entire list is actually allowed and recognized by the EF context. And this is why we have decided to actually an individual database and also invite you to work only on that database, but not to combine it with your, let's say, traditional databases. But Ruba will come back to that later because I think it's never enough to stress this specific point. But possibly the most important one, and also if we consider what has been all along one of the main objectives of the PEF initiative, it was to ensure comparability. I can tell you that we have calculated for every single data set the LCIA results using the FIA method, and we have exactly the same results that are calculated by the Commission themselves. So we can ensure 100% alignment. It would not be sufficient to convince those listening that SimaPro is fully EF compliant tool. Here you see highlighted in green the pilots in which SimaPro was used to develop the benchmark product, so the representative products, so those that are, let's say, the results of the average European products. And as you can see, it's about half of the pilots have been modeled in SimaPro. So I think this shows that the software is equipped to help you to do also your PEF studies and OEF studies. If that would not be all, what we see is that for most organizations who are involved in the pilot phase, they are now interested in taking the next step. So the first step was to set up the guidance, so the methodological rules, and now they want to make it more practical and pragmatic. And they want to also give access to a larger number of members or member companies. And that way they think there must be a tool solution as well if we want to take the next step. And we can do that for you as well. And essentially we think of two different ways. Either we can help you to develop it fully using our own, a set of tools and modules we have already in SimaPro, but you can also develop it and connect to the data model and calculation engine in SimaPro, but keeping the user interface as something that you are either already familiar with or, an existing system that you might already have at your premises, but making sure that it connects to the data, to the model, and to the calculation in SimaPro. So these are two ways, and if you are interested in any of these, please just get in touch. And just to tell you a bit of how we foresee this going forward is that we actually facilitate this, accessibility to results and quicker generation of results by giving access to the benchmark model, so to the baseline model which was used for the BFCR. And then you can use parameters to input your company-specific data. And that way you don't need to model from scratch. You can use the existing model, but where needed to input the data that is company-specific data and that is required by the BFCR. And then you get the results out. So that is much quicker than if you had to do it from. Now we have another interesting question to our audience, and that is, if you are listening to this webinar, we would also like to know what would you like to use the EF database for. So for that, we also have a poll where we thought of a number of options you could be interested in. And actually, the interesting thing about this poll is also that you can select more than one option. So the options you will see is any LCA study I do, why not? only for studies compliant with existing PFCRs or FSRs, only the impact assessment method but not the data, or the values of the end-of-life formula, because then we are talking about things like recycling rates, incineration rates per country, and so on. So I'm very interested to see also how you see the potential for your own use of this database. So voting is in progress. And I guess you are just as curious as we are. So we're at 80% at the moment. 85. Okay, just a few seconds. Okay, I'll close the poll now and share, because that's the one part we forgot to do with the previous poll. Now I know how to do it. So then we have about half of the people saying any LCA study or not. And about then 37% says either for PET or studies compliant with existing PFCRs and EFSRs, or to use it for the end-of-life formula. And only 22% would be interested in using only the method.
We had another suggestion for that was not one of the items on the multiple choice, is that it could be for research and development.
Yeah, exactly. So it could also be for research and development. Now I will hide the poll and continue, because then at least I can tell you what you can use for which purpose, because we indeed have released the EF database for download in our website, but there are some, let's say, conditions that you should be aware of when downloading. And these are, of course, very well identified and documented in the webpage of the EF database in the SimaPro.com website. And sorry about the large amount of text, but this is really important for you to know. So who is eligible to use the database? Well, the datasets, they are actually, they can only be used free of charge if you are conducting PEF or OEF studies exclusively under the approved product groups and sectors, so those I've shown before, which have been approved during the EF pilot phase. So this is really important, that you are only entitled to use this data for free if you fit this group and if you plan on conducting a PEF or OEF study following the existing PFCRs and EFSRs, and in accordance with the terms and conditions of the EULAS. So actually, before you download, you are asked to accept all terms and conditions, and this includes the EULAS of each individual data provider, and you can also read them individually, but they are essentially a copy of one another, just with another entity. And this is also only allowed until 31st of December of 2021. After that, also the permit is no longer there. When it comes to the impact assessment method and the database parameters for the end-of-life formula, these are all for free. So these are not bound to any terms and conditions, and this is why we have already released the impact assessment method version 2.0, but as an adapted version in the professional database. And we mean adapted in the sense that there we took into consideration that the list of flows is actually larger than the one in the EF package 2.0. So that's the only difference that you will see between the two. And the database parameters, well, like I said, these are recycling rates, incineration rates for different materials for different EU countries. So these can be useful in the context of a study for any of you anyways. Feel free to go and use it. Now I pass on to Ruba again because she's the one who knows about downloads.
Yeah, so the less complex part, but still interesting to share with you is how to actually access a database. So we've shared the web link previously, but this is the direct link. It will lead you to the request form. So I'm just highlighting part of it. But three things to keep in mind. The first and most important is the terms and conditions, as Marisa said. So you have to be eligible, and it's the user liability to accept those terms and go through them. Another thing is that you do need a valid SimaPro service contract, and you have to have either SimaPro 8.5 or SimaPro 9 already. So after you fill in the form, you accept the terms and conditions, and then you will get a submit button where you can submit the form. Leading you to the following page. So this is the actual download page. And here you have to just make sure you watch out and download the relevant version. Some users are still using SimaPro 8, 8.5 specifically. So we've made a version available for those users. For users using SimaPro 9, you also have a separate version because our technical database is, there's a difference there. So just make sure to pay attention which version you download. What you will download is actually a zip file. It's a compressed file. So once you unzip it, let's say, you will get two files. One is the user instructions, which is a PDF including all kinds of technical information and user information. We will share this PDF with you also later in the session as a handout during the webinar, but it's also included in the package. And you will also see this .exe file. This is actually an installer, so you have to double click to start the installation process of the database. You can choose the location where you want to save the database, but please remember that you will need to have to enter your SimaPro registration name and your SimaPro registration code with this installer, like when you install SimaPro or update to a new version. So just make sure you keep it in close by. Again, I would like to emphasize on the following. It's not possible to combine the EF database with your existing SimaPro database. So, as Marisa mentioned previously, because the EF compliance can no longer be guaranteed, the substances are different. It's not recommended at all to merge the databases, and you will probably get a lot of errors if you try to import one database into the hub. But the rest, it should go smoothly. So back to you, Marisa.
Thank you. So now I will tell a few more things that you should be aware of and pay attention to when you actually start working with this database in SimaPro. And now I will kind of be switching back and forth between the slide deck and SimaPro. So like Ruba said, so you get an installer, you are asked to place it somewhere, and then you can open that database individually. And you'll see when you open, and sorry, you're seeing a lot of things. So here you see, this is the opening window. And as you can see, and as I said earlier, this only includes one single library project, which we call EF 2.0. Then you can see here below a description of what it includes. So then I say open, but of course, the moment you start working on a project, then you click new, you create a project like you usually do for other LCA studies you make. So you see here that we keep the same, let's say, process tree we had originally, and we have placed them in the appropriate categories. And you can see here on the bottom that there are 3,200 data sets included in this database. And now I will be again switching back to tell you a few more things about specificities of the EF database in SimaPro. So one of it is that you will notice that the name of these datasets is slightly different from what you have been seeing so far in SimaPro, and that has to do with the ILCD format. The ILCD format prescribes that there are 5 different elements that constitute a process dataset. The first one is the base name, and then with the curved parentheses, the location. Then we have treatment standards routes, we have mix and location types, we have functional unit flow properties, and then the type of dataset. And as you see, each one of them is, each of these elements is separated in SimaPro by a vertical separator. So here you see an example, dimethyl acetamide production, that's the base name. Glow is then the location, so that's global. Then we have the treatment standard route, that's the technology mix. Mix and location types, that's production mix at plant. Then the functional units, that's 100% of active substance, and then the type of dataset is LCI result. And this typology of the type of dataset, this is really something which is specific for LCI, ILCD datasets, and you will see that most of them are actually using this typology of LCI result, and that is because all datasets in the end are aggregated datasets, so they are what would be, you know, in trying to make the synonym in SimaPro with the system datasets we have in SimaPro typically, with the only difference that for some of them there are some parameters included, and there are also dummies included, which takes me then to the next step, because one thing you should be aware of, it was a deliberate call by the European Commission to, in some cases, not determine in advance what the input datasets of a certain activity should be, but to leave that option up to the user. So what they have entered is a dummy. So that's essentially a kind of placeholder for these input datasets to be entered, but you are the one entitled and asked to replace it by the appropriate dataset. So as you see here, we have an example for aluminium extrusion, where we can see that there is a dummy input process, which is called aluminium ingot for extrusion, and it's 1.323 kilograms. Well, what you are asked to do is then to replace this one by an actual dataset for aluminium ingot. And they have done this in cases where they had more than one which would be adequate, and they want the user to determine which one should be used. So just to show you again quickly in SimaPro, and there is a very easy way to see which of those are dummies. And as you see, they all had these rectangular brackets. So if you sort by name, then the top ones will be all the dummies. And I will just show you. It's not such a daunting list, but there are in total, almost there. Stay with me. So there are in total 108 items. You see it here at the bottom. So there are about 100 datasets, and these are the datasets that require the replacement. So what I encourage you to do is to start using the datasets, and when you start looking at your calculated results and you look at your process contribution and you find dummies, then you can go to that dummy and then you say here, for instance, use by, and then you see what are the datasets that might be using that dummy, and then you go into that dataset and you will replace that input. So it's the first input from Technosphere always, but as you see, there are a lot of input flows from nature, but here you see these are the dummies, for instance, included in this dataset, solder-based. Yeah, so this is really something to be aware of, because if you don't do this replacement of the dummies, your model will be incomplete. Yeah?
So we have a question about that, Marisa. So when replacing them, is it just like what you showed as an example, or would it also be that you have to supply it?
That depends on the specific PFCR. So in some PFCRs, they say it has to be, that list of default data sets. And in some others, they say, actually, you can replace it by company-specific data, in that case, company-specific of their own supplier. But they should see it on a case-by-case, looking at what is included in the PFCR and what it requires. Yeah. So this was what I had to say with regards to dummies. There is one more thing that is also a bit different when it comes to PEF compared to traditional LCA studies, and that is, according to the PEF, you are also required to do data quality assessment, and that has a very particular way that it must be conducted, the data quality assessment. But one of the things is that each individual EF secondary data set actually has already data quality criteria and their individual scores in the metadata. And you can see here we have time representative, well, we even have time representativeness, so that's very good, and geographical representativeness, 2, good. Technological representativeness, 2, good. Precision, also 2. And then methodological appropriateness and consistency, 3. So these you will find in the comment field of SimaPro for each. And these documents what are then the default values to use when you do the quality assessment of your own PEF study. Yeah, in the user instructions, which I forgot to mention, but we have as a handout, and if all goes well, you should be able to download it. We have added also the user instructions that you receive when you download the EF database, and there you will also see there is a hyperlink to an Excel file, and this Excel file includes all EF secondary data sets that were purchased by the European Commission, and also the individual data quality score of each for each of the criteria. So this might be actually a much better way to use it than to look into it in SimaPro, because then you can directly use it also for calculations. So this was with regards to what we have now. And like I said, this release was really targeted to serving those who were active during the pilot phase. But as we know, now the transition phase has started. And that implies that we'll also want to serve those that will come later. So one thing that we want to do, but which we are not ready to do yet because the Commission hasn't released these, is to make the models of the representative products and organizations available. So you can use them as a starting point for your specific PEF results or EF results. If you are interested in this already, you can send us a request and we can see what we can do already now. But the idea is later on to make all of these available. And the EFIA method, version 3.0, which I mentioned earlier. So that is the version to be used during the EF transition phase. And we are actually working on its implementation as we speak, and that will be released in the next SimaPro database update, so SimaPro 9.1, which would still be somewhere this year. Now, this was really a quick sneak preview into the highlights when it comes to, PEF and the EF database in SimaPro. But if you really want to get hands-on, if you really want to learn about making a PEF study, we hold twice a year a PEF training in SimaPro, where we go through all the methodological rules that are specific to PEF, but we also go into a practical case using the beer PFCR as a case, and then you really learn on how to do it and how to use it. So if you are interested, I invite you to join. I will be one of the trainers. And you can register via our website on Press Sustainability. And now I am curious to see what questions you have for us.
Yes,
because there's still plenty of time.
Yes, I've been saving a few, so I'll start with one about the dummy processes. So the dummy processes contain amounts. And the question basically is if this, when replacing a dummy process, can the amount also be used as a proxy, the amount mentioned, or does it have to be then also replaced?
No, the amount that must be used. So if you also take into account the rules of the PEF, you can change an input of a data set, but you cannot change the amount because then it would be modifying the secondary.
So that actually makes it easier for users.
Yes.
You just actually select the process, but you don't have to change that.
Yes. Okay. So it's really just replacing this placeholder by the adequate input data set, but the amounts, you don't need to touch them at all.
And another question is, where can I download the end-of-life parameters?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good question because I forgot to change that to show that part in SimaPro. I will do that. So here you see the parameters. I will go there, and here you see database parameters, and you see here that we have defined all kinds of input parameters. So this is for the A values, so the allocation value. But if I go down, you will see the list is very big. So it has A values for different materials, then R1 values, which is the recycle content for steel, for instance, for lead. But it also has R2 values, so that's the recycling rate at the end of life. And those are even per country. You don't see them now because the window is too small. But you see that the list is quite exhaustive, and R3 is the incineration rate. You see here we have the landfill rate and that per country. So you can just use these parameters instead or combine with other amounts that you might have, and then it collects the number that was determined during the pilot phase. And this, I think, is quite useful. The quality of secondary materials is also included. But this essentially is a translation of the Annex C, which is an annex that has information about all end-of-life default values, and we put it in the software.
I'm not sure if you showed it. I'm sorry, I was checking the questions, but are you planning to include parameters to calculate specific emissions due to the use of fertilizers, pesticides, or livestock direct emissions?
It's a very good question because that has to do more with translating, so to speak, the agricultural modeling rules into modeling. At the moment, no. The only thing we have done is to facilitate the information that was provided by the Commission themselves. If in the course of the transition phase, the rules evolve in such a way that there is also information that we can easily make available to our users, then certainly.
Thank you. We have a number of eligibility questions, but before we move on to, because there are quite a number, there is a question regarding the PEF tool you showed. And the question is it equivalent to mapping files between SimaPro dataset and an EF dataset? Is that kind of the idea behind it?
No, that's not the idea. That's something we can do as part of the setting up of the, let's say, baseline model. But the idea is that we have the original model that was used for modeling the representative product that is included in the PFCR, that we make that available in SimaPro, and that anywhere where that specific PFCR says here you must collect company-specific data, we either put a parameter that allows for a specific user to put its own value, or we let them create a complete new data set for that item and then plug it into the model. So that is the idea. But the mapping files between, let's say, for instance, existing EcoInvent data sets and EF data sets, that is not foreseen, but that could be, a service that we could provide.
Yeah. But regarding the PEF tool, it would basically mean users do not have to reinvent the wheel. They can take the model, build, and just enter
the input data and get the results. and it will communicate with an existing model that has the link to this input data and to the result.
And the data.
Yeah.
Everything's configured.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. So regarding eligibility, so it's one question is it possible to have insight in the database if you're not involved at in the PEF or OEF pilots? I'm not sure what the extent insight means, but
yeah, according to the rules, and as you could see, and I will go back just because I cannot say that big text myself that easily, but you are only able to use this for free if you are conducting PEF or OEF studies exclusively under the approved PFCRs and OEFSRs. If you want to just view it, or if you want to, I don't
outside
know.
the scope,
exactly. Then you would have to contact the individual data providers to see if they would agree with that alternative use. But the terms and conditions are very clear about what they find eligible for free of charge use.
And are the benchmark product models available on request from PRAE? No, then that is really just from the providers.
Yeah, so we were leaders of the consortium who has been in charge of the modeling of all these baseline models. So of course we have the right context, so to speak, because it has been all partners within the consortium that have done it. But what we would do is facilitate the connection with any of these parties that have been developing these models, or with the commission. If the commission would be willing to release it in advance to, the branch association who developed the PFCR, then it's their call to make. But at this point, we couldn't do.
And any chance that these benchmark models are free of charge?
Yeah, that we will have to see, also depending on how the commission is planning to release them and how easy it will be for us to include it. What we believe is in, accessibility to all users. So it's certainly in our willingness to facilitate that, but we will have to see.
And you mentioned as far as the validity of the contracts, let's say, until the end of 2021. Do you have any idea what will happen afterwards, or will users have to pay for something if they had it for free, or any idea?
Yeah, that also has to do with the validity of the current PFCRs and OEFSRs, because there it is also stated that those are also only valid until the end of 2021. And since you can only use these datasets free of charge in combination with these PFCRs and OEFSRs, then it's kind of obvious that those are also limited to that period of validity. What I can tell you is that, and I know the Commission is already, making progress with setting up new contracts with the same data providers for an update for the transition phase, meaning that the projects that will be running during the transition phase will also have similar accessibility conditions. And then the period will be the period of those PFCRs and OEFSRs that will then be approved during the transition phase. This is what I know now.
Yeah. Okay. And a remark that only the European Commission can share the models developed during the remote project, and it will not be under the obligation of the partners.
No, it's correct that it's not under the obligation of the partners, but the partners are the one that can release it, possibly in a format that is, readily ready for use by users. But these partners have to ask for permission to the Commission before providing it.
Okay, and one more question about not sure actually. Was it March 2019? Was it? Oh,
Should be March 2020.
oh,
My apologies.
thanks.
So it's 1920 March 2020.
Thank you for that training. Oh yes. Thanks for the correction. Yeah. Oh yeah, I didn't shoot myself. So thank you so much for noting. We'll modify that. And I think that captured. I think we've captured most of the questions. Let's see if there's something. Somebody mentioned that the link in one of the handout was not working properly. If you have any issues, please let me know. You will get a follow-up email with a link to the recording. You can skip the first minute or two since we had audio difficulties. Feel free to follow us on social media and to keep you updated on the latest regarding PET and other developments, data and applications using SimaPro. And feel free to check out the Help Center in a few days for recordings of not only this webinar, but other webinars you may have. So thanks, Marisa. Thank you all for attending. And yeah, hope to see you virtually another time. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you all.